The dust rose in angry clouds as Deputy Marshal Colt Anderson rode into Fort Benton, Montana territory. The year was 1876, and the small trading post settlement along the Missouri River had grown into a bustling frontier town. His weathered face told the story of a man who'd seen too much for his 30 years, but his eyes still carried a spark of determination as he surveyed the streets from atop his chestnut mare. "Steady, Belle," he murmured to his horse as they passed the saloon where raucous laughter spilled into the afternoon air. Colt had come to Fort Benton tracking a notorious band of outlaws, men who dealt in weapons, whiskey, and if the rumors were true, human lives. Fort Benton had earned its reputation as the innermost port in the United States, the final stop for steamboats pushing up the Missouri River. It served as the gateway to the Montana gold fields and a critical trade hub for settlers, miners, and Native American tribes alike. But where honest commerce thrived, so did its shadow. Colt dismounted outside the sheriff's office, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the packed dirt. The building was modest, a wooden structure with a small jail attached to the back. He'd been deputized by a federal marshal in Helena, specifically to investigate disappearances along the frontier. Women had gone missing, settlers, immigrants, and Native Americans alike, and whispers of a slave trading operation had reached as far as the territorial capital. Sheriff Jim Wilkins greeted him with a firm handshake. "Anderson wasn't expecting you for another day." "Rode hard," Colt replied, removing his hat and running fingers through his sandy brown hair. "Any developments since your telegram?" Wilkins' face darkened. 2 more women reported missing. One was a widow heading west on the last steamboat. The other was washing clothes down by the river. Blackfoot woman from one of the friendly bands that trade here. Colt's jaw tightened. "That brings the count to 7 in the last 3 months. 5 that we know of still unaccounted for," the sheriff corrected. "Folks are scared, Anderson. This ain't like regular outlaws stealing horses or holding up banks. This is—" He trailed off, unable to find words suitable for the depravity. "I know what it is," Colt said grimly. His hand unconsciously moved to the scar that ran along his jaw, a reminder of a similar case in Wyoming territory 2 years prior. "I need to know about newcomers to town, especially traders setting up temporary operations." Sheriff Wilkins poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to Colt. "There's been several new faces, but one outfit in particular arrived about 4 months back, set up a trading post north of town near where the Teton River joins the Missouri. Man named Silas Blackwood claims to be a legitimate fur trader, but I've had my suspicions." Colt tensed at the name. "Blackwood, tall man, black beard going gray, missing the top of his left ear." The sheriff's eyebrows shot up. "You know him?" "I know of him," Colt replied, his voice hardening. "He operated in Colorado territory until things got too hot. Sold weapons to hostile tribes while selling information about their locations to the army. When that business dried up, he moved on to other merchandise." "Women?" Wilkins asked quietly. Colt nodded. "And children. Sells them to mining camps, remote ranches, and worse. He's careful, though, uses legitimate business as cover. Never caught him with enough evidence." "Well, he set up a proper operation here, has about 8 men working for him. They come into town for supplies and whiskey, but mostly keep to themselves." Colt drained his coffee. "I'll need a day to observe, then I'm going to pay Mr. Blackwood a visit." His blue eyes had turned to ice. "But first, I need to know about the missing women, everything about them." By sunset, Colt had a clearer picture of whom he was looking for. The missing women came from different backgrounds, but shared certain qualities. They were all young to middle-aged, healthy, and in vulnerable positions with few connections in town. The perfect targets for men like Blackwood. At the modest boarding house where he'd taken a room, Colt carefully cleaned his Colt Peacemaker revolver and Winchester rifle. As darkness settled over Fort Benton, he stared out the window toward the north, where somewhere beyond the town lights, 5 women might be enduring unspeakable conditions. "Not for much longer," he whispered to himself. "Not if I have anything to say about it." The next day, Colt spent his time discreetly observing the town, noting the comings and goings of Blackwood's men. He spotted two of them loading supplies at the general store, rough-looking characters with the hardened expressions of men who'd crossed every moral line for money. By nightfall, he'd formed his plan. Rather than storming the camp with the sheriff, which could put the captives in danger, he would infiltrate alone. Sheriff Wilkins didn't like it, but agreed to have a posse ready to ride if Colt didn't return by dawn. Under the cover of darkness, Colt rode north along the Missouri. He left Belle tied in a grove of cottonwoods half a mile from Blackwood's camp and continued on foot, moving silently through the brush as he'd learned to do during the war. The camp was larger than he'd expected: several large canvas tents, a corral with horses, and two covered wagons. A campfire burned in the center where three men sat drinking and playing cards. Colt counted at least two more men patrolling the perimeter, rifles slung across their shoulders. For an hour he watched, learning their patterns. Then he spotted a large tent set apart from the others with a man stationed outside. Unlike the other tents, this one had no light within, but Colt could see it was securely fastened from the outside. Moving like a shadow, he circled around behind the camp. When one of the guards wandered too far into the darkness to relieve himself, Colt struck a swift blow to the back of the head with the butt of his revolver. He dragged the unconscious man into the bushes, bound and gagged him, then took his hat and coat. With his head down and shoulders hunched, Colt walked with purpose toward the prisoner tent, mimicking the guard's gait. The man outside the tent barely gave him a glance. "Thought you was playing cards," the guard said lazily. "Lost my money," Colt muttered, keeping his face turned away. "Blackwood wants me to check on the merchandise before the buyers arrive tomorrow." The guard grunted and stepped aside. "They've been quiet since we gave them water at sundown. One of them tried to kick Patterson earlier, though." "I'll handle it," Colt said, reaching for the tent flap. The moment he was inside, he drew his knife and sliced through the canvas at the back of the tent, creating an escape route. Only then did he strike a match. The small flame illuminated a scene that turned his stomach despite his years of seeing humanity at its worst. 5 women were chained to stakes driven into the ground. They ranged in age from perhaps 18 to 40, their clothes torn, faces dirty and marked with bruises. 3 appeared to be settlers or townswomen. One was clearly Native American, and another had the darker complexion suggesting Mexican heritage. Their eyes widened with fear at his appearance, but Colt quickly put a finger to his lips. "I'm Deputy Marshal Anderson," he whispered. "I'm here to free you, but we must be quiet." "They'll kill you," whispered one of the women, her voice hoarse. "There are too many." "Let me worry about that," Colt replied, examining their shackles. The chains were secured with padlocks, and he cursed under his breath. "Where does Blackwood keep the keys?" "In his tent," said the Native American woman, her English precise despite her evident exhaustion. "The large one by the fire," Colt nodded. "I need to create a distraction. When I return, be ready to move fast. If you hear gunfire before I come back, try to stay low." He slipped back out through the front of the tent. The guard looked at him questioningly. "All fine," Colt said casually. "I'm going to get some coffee." As he walked toward the campfire, Colt's mind raced through options. He needed to get those keys, free the women, and somehow escape with all 5 of them without getting killed in the crossfire. The odds weren't good. Fate, however, handed him an opportunity. As he approached the fire, Blackwood himself emerged from his tent, clearly drunk and in a foul mood. The slave trader was exactly as Colt remembered him: tall and imposing with a black beard shot through with gray and the distinctive missing upper portion of his left ear. "You," Blackwood barked at Colt, not recognizing him in the guard's coat and hat. "Go check on the horses." "Thought I heard something." Colt turned his face away and nodded, walking toward the corral, but instead of checking the horses, he circled around to Blackwood's tent. Inside, he quickly located a ring of keys on a small folding table next to a ledger book. He pocketed both, then spotted something that gave him an idea. 2 minutes later, Colt had positioned himself near the supply wagon. He struck a match and touched it to the fuse of a stick of dynamite he'd found in Blackwood's tent. He lobbed it far from the camp, toward an empty stretch of riverbank. The explosion shook the ground. As expected, the men scrambled for their weapons, shouting in confusion. "Indians?" someone yelled, and Blackwood began barking orders to defend the camp's perimeter. In the chaos, Colt slipped back to the prison tent. The guard had abandoned his post to join the defense, just as Colt had hoped. He ducked inside, knife ready. "It's time," he told the women, quickly working the keys into their locks. "There's a cut in the back of the tent. We're heading for the river." One by one, the shackles fell away. The women rubbed at their wrists and ankles where the metal had chafed their skin raw. Colt helped the weakest to her feet, an older woman with graying blonde hair and a dignified face despite her circumstances. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice carrying a slight German accent. "Save your thanks until we're safe," Colt replied, guiding them through the slit in the canvas. "Stay low and follow me." The night air was filled with shouts as Blackwood's men frantically searched for an attack that wasn't coming. Colt led the women away from the camp, keeping to the shadows of the cottonwood trees that lined the riverbank. They moved slowly, hampered by the women's weakened condition. "They'll discover we're gone soon," said the Native American woman who had introduced herself as Hawk Feather of the Blackfoot tribe. She moved more steadily than the others, her determination evident in every step. "My horse is half a mile south," Colt said. "We won't all fit," but he was cut off by a shout from the camp. "The women are gone, the tent's empty," Colt cursed. "Change of plans, into the river. There's a small island about 100 yards downstream. We can hide there until morning." "Some of us cannot swim," said the Mexican woman, Helena Lopez, fear widening her dark eyes. "The current's not strong here," Colt assured her. "I'll help those who need it. The water will hide our scent if they bring dogs." One by one, they entered the cold waters of the Missouri River, gasping at the shock. Colt supported the German woman, Helga Lindemann, who was the weakest of the group. The two other women, Hannah Larson, a young widow from Minnesota, and Harriet Lambert, a schoolteacher from St. Louis, helped each other. They reached the small island just as lanterns began to bob along the shore behind them. Ducking into a dense thicket of willows, the group huddled together for warmth, their wet clothes clinging to shivering bodies. "They'll search all night," Colt whispered. "But they'll assume we've fled south toward town. At first light, we'll cross to the east bank and make our way to my horse. From there, we can reach Fort Benton by midday." Hannah Larson, the young widow with auburn hair and determined green eyes, studied him in the darkness. "Why did you come alone? Why not bring the sheriff?" "A group would have been spotted," Colt explained. "And Blackwood has a habit of killing his captives rather than letting them be rescued. I couldn't risk it." He didn't add that he'd been hunting Blackwood for years, that this was personal for him in ways the sheriff couldn't understand. "How did you know we were there?" asked Harriet Lambert, the schoolteacher whose once fine dress was now tattered and stained. "Women have been disappearing," Colt said simply. "I've been tracking men like Blackwood for years. When I heard about the missing women in Fort Benton, I knew it was likely him or someone like him." Hawk Feather moved closer, her dark eyes reflecting the distant lantern light. "You have encountered such men before." It wasn't a question, but Colt nodded anyway. "Too many times." The night stretched long, filled with the sounds of distant shouting as the search continued. The women drifted into exhausted sleep one by one, except for Hawk Feather, who kept vigil with Colt. "My people will be searching for me," she said quietly. "I am the daughter of Chief Running Elk." Colt looked at her with new understanding. "That explains why you were taken. Blackwood would have demanded a high ransom," she nodded, "or sold me to enemies of my people for an even higher price." Her eyes held his. "You have a good heart, Colt Anderson. Few white men would risk themselves for women they do not know, especially when one is Blackfoot." "I don't see 5 women of different backgrounds," he replied. "I see 5 human beings who deserve freedom." Hawk Feather smiled slightly. "My father would call you Braveheart. It is a name of honor among my people." As dawn approached, Colt roused the sleeping women. "We need to move now while the search has died down and before full light." They crossed the river at its shallowest point, the morning mist providing additional cover. By the time they reached Colt's horse, the sun was beginning to burn away the fog. Belle snorted a greeting and Colt quickly untied her. "Helga, you'll ride," he decided, helping the older woman onto the saddle. "The rest of us will walk alongside. With Colt leading Belle by the reins, the bedraggled group made their way south toward Fort Benton. They kept to the cover of trees when possible, all too aware that Blackwood and his men might be searching the same route. Their progress was slow but steady. Hawk Feather gathered berries along the way, sharing them among the group to provide some small nourishment. Hannah walked close to Colt, occasionally touching his arm when she needed support over rough terrain. "Were you always a lawman?" she asked during one such moment, her voice soft but stronger than it had been the night before. "No," he replied, steadying her as she stepped over a fallen log. "I fought in the war Union side. Afterward, I drifted, tried ranching for a spell in Wyoming, then some bad men came through our valley. They took my neighbor's daughters." His jaw tightened at the memory. "Local law didn't do enough, so I tracked them myself. Brought the girls home, but their father didn't survive the ordeal." "That's when you became a marshal?" Hannah asked. Colt nodded. "The federal marshal who eventually helped me was impressed enough to offer me a badge. Been doing this ever since." By midday, the distant buildings of Fort Benton came into view. Colt helped Helga down from Belle, deciding it was safer for them all to approach on foot. As they neared the outskirts of town, Sheriff Wilkins and 3 deputies rode toward them, rifles ready. "Anderson." The sheriff called out, relief evident in his voice. "We were about to ride out looking for you." His eyes widened as he took in the 5 women. "You found them all, and confirmed it's Blackwood," Colt replied grimly. "He's got at least 7 men with him, maybe more." Wilkins quickly dispatched one of his deputies to fetch the doctor while the others helped escort the women into town. Word spread rapidly, and by the time they reached the sheriff's office, a crowd had gathered. The town doctor, a kindly older man named Dr. Porter, arrived promptly and began examining the women in the sheriff's back room. The local hotel proprietor, Mrs. Mason, brought clean clothes and offered rooms for all 5 women free of charge. "Blackwood will come looking for them," Colt warned the sheriff as they stood outside the doctor's makeshift examination room. "They're valuable merchandise to him, and now we've got evidence against him." He patted the ledger book in his pocket. "Let him come," Wilkins said firmly. "We'll be ready." Colt wasn't so sure. He'd seen how Blackwood operated. The man rarely made frontal assaults when subterfuge would serve. "Post extra guards tonight, and I want to move the women somewhere less obvious than the hotel." "Where did you have in mind?" Colt considered this. "The old Jensen place is vacant, isn't it? About a mile out of town. Been empty nearly a year since old Carl died," the sheriff confirmed. "His nephew in Helena owns it now but hasn't decided what to do with it. It's defensible, set against that hill with clear sight lines," Colt said. "And it's not the first place Blackwood would look." Wilkins nodded slowly. "I'll send some men out to make sure it's habitable, but Anderson, these women need more than just a safe place for a few days. They've lost everything." Colt knew the sheriff was right. Helena and Hannah had been on their way to new lives when they were taken. Harriet had been passing through on a stagecoach. Helga had lost her husband and was traveling to meet her son in Oregon. And Hawk Feather needed to return to her people, who might already be at war with settlements over her disappearance. "One step at a time," Colt said. "First, we keep them safe and get them healthy. Then we bring Blackwood to justice. After that, we'll figure out what comes next, Doctor." Porter emerged from the examination room, his kind face grave. "They're malnourished and exhausted with various injuries from being restrained. Mrs. Lindemann has a fever I'm concerned about, but considering what they've endured, they're remarkably resilient." "Can they be moved?" Colt asked. "Preferably not until tomorrow," the doctor replied. "But I understand the security concerns. If it must be today, we should wait until evening when they've had some rest and nourishment." By dusk, preparations were complete. The Jensen homestead had been cleaned and stocked with provisions. The sheriff had stationed 2 deputies there, and Colt had personally checked all approaches to the property. He returned to town to escort the women himself. They gathered in the back of the sheriff's office, each looking marginally better after a day of rest, food, and clean clothes. Helga still moved slowly, but her fever had responded to the doctor's medicines. "You're moving us?" Harriet asked, concern in her voice. "Somewhere safer," Colt assured her. "Somewhere Blackwood won't think to look right away." Hannah stepped forward, her chin held high. We're not helpless, Marshal Anderson. We can help defend ourselves if you'll allow it. The other women nodded in agreement, even Helga. Colt saw in their eyes not just the trauma of captivity, but a fierce determination born from it. I'm counting on that, he told them with a slight smile. And please, call me Colt. They traveled in a covered wagon borrowed from the livery, with Colt riding alongside on Bell and Sheriff Wilkins following behind. The journey to the Jensen place took less than half an hour. As they approached the simple two-story farmhouse, Colt noticed how the women's postures straightened, as if the sight of a proper home awakened something in them. The house was modest but solid, 4 bedrooms upstairs, a large kitchen and sitting room below. A barn stood nearby and a small creek ran along the property's edge. The 2 deputies Wilkins had stationed there greeted them at the door, reporting no suspicious activity. Inside, lamps had been lit, a fire burned in the hearth, and the smell of stew simmering on the stove filled the air. Mrs. Mason had seen to these comforts personally, and the women's faces softened at these simple signs of civilization. It's not permanent, Colt explained as they gathered in the sitting room, but it's secure for now. Once we've dealt with Blackwood, we can discuss longer-term arrangements. What if we wanted to stay? Hannah asked suddenly. All eyes turned to her and she flushed slightly but continued. Here I mean together, Helga nodded slowly. I have nowhere to be, my son. Her voice broke slightly. I received word at the hotel. He died of influenza last winter. There is no one waiting for me in Oregon now. My school position in California has surely been filled, Harriet added, and I have no family back east. Helena gripped Harriet's hand. I was traveling to San Francisco to work as a housekeeper. There is nothing special waiting there, just another household where I would be a servant. Hawkfeather was the only one who didn't immediately agree. My people will be concerned, she said. But she hesitated, then continued. There has been increasing conflict between my tribe and the white settlements. My father sent me to visit my mother's sister who married into the Crow tribe, hoping I might help build peace through family connections. Perhaps I can still serve that purpose from here. Colt looked from face to face, understanding dawning. These 5 women, thrown together by terrible circumstance, had formed a bond. They'd survived together, and now they were contemplating building something new together. Sheriff Wilkins rubbed his chin thoughtfully. The Jensen place is for sale. Town council's been trying to attract settlers to take over abandoned properties. He glanced at Colt. But they'd need income protection. Something shifted in Colt's chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced since before the war. Purpose, yes, but something more. As he looked at these 5 remarkable women, particularly at Hannah with her determined green eyes, he felt the stirrings of a different kind of future than the lonely one he'd envisioned for himself. Let's focus on Blackwood first, he said, though his mind was already racing ahead. But if staying together is what you all want, I'll do everything I can to help make it happen. The women exchanged smiles, tentative but genuine. Even in the midst of danger, hope had taken root. That night, Colt kept watch from the front porch, his Winchester across his lap. Sheriff Wilkins had returned to town to organize the response should Blackwood make a move. The 2 deputies patrolled the property perimeter. Around midnight, Hannah stepped outside, wrapped in a shawl against the cool night air. May I join you? She asked softly. Colt nodded, shifting to make room on the bench beside him. For a while, they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds, crickets chirping, the distant hoot of an owl, the gentle babble of the creek. I've been thinking about what happens after, Hannah finally said. If we stayed here, the 5 of us, we could make something of this place. Helga is an excellent cook. Harriet could teach local children. Helena knows farming from her childhood in Mexico. Hawkfeather understands medicines and hunting, and I— She hesitated. And you, Colt prompted gently. I managed my late husband's general store back in Minnesota, she said. I understand business accounts. We could turn this into more than just a refuge, a real home that supports itself. Colt studied her profile in the moonlight. Hannah Larson was no more than 25, yet she spoke with the confidence of someone who had faced hardship and emerged stronger. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple braid, and though her borrowed dress was plain, she carried herself with natural grace. It's a good plan, he said. The land around here is fertile. Fort Benton's growing. There's always need for education, good food, medicine. Hannah turned to face him fully. But we'd need help at first, someone who knows this territory, who could teach us how to defend ourselves, who understands the challenges. Her eyes held his. Someone like you, Colt. The directness of her gaze stirred something in him, admiration, certainly, but also a warmth he'd denied himself for years. Since losing his family farm in Wyoming, Colt had avoided putting down roots, telling himself his work required mobility. But the truth was simpler and more painful. He'd been afraid to care too deeply again. "I'm just a deputy marshal," he said quietly. "I follow trouble from town to town." "Is that all you want to be?" Hannah asked. "Forever?" Before he could answer, one of the deputies approached from the darkness. "Marshal, rider coming, moving slow, looks to be alone." Colt stood immediately, rifle ready. "Get inside," he told Hannah. "Wake the others, but stay quiet and away from the windows." She nodded and slipped into the house. Colt moved to the edge of the porch, signaling the deputy to take position at the side of the house. In the pale moonlight, he could make out a single horseman approaching along the road from town. As the rider drew closer, Colt recognized Sheriff Wilkins. He relaxed slightly, but kept his rifle at the ready. Something about the sheriff's posture seemed wrong. When Wilkins was 20 yards away, he called out, "Anderson, need to speak with you?" "Come ahead, Sheriff," Colt responded, still wary. Wilkins rode up to the hitching post and dismounted stiffly. As he stepped into the pool of light from the porch lantern, Colt saw the blood on his shirt. "Ambush," Wilkins gasped, clutching his side. "In town, Blackwood's men, they were waiting at the office." He stumbled and Colt rushed forward to catch him. "How many?" Colt demanded, helping the sheriff onto the porch. "6, maybe 7, Wilkins said through gritted teeth. "They're not far behind me, wanted me to lead them here," he grimaced. "Played along, but took a roundabout way." "Bought you maybe 15 minutes. The front door opened, and Hannah gasped at the sight of the wounded sheriff. "Get Dr. Porter," she began, but Wilkins shook his head. "No time. They have the doctor and his family held in their home. Said they'd kill them if he tried to help." Colt's mind raced. 2 deputies, himself, and 5 women who were still recovering from captivity against at least 6 armed men, not odds he liked. "What about your other deputies?" Colt asked. "1 dead, 2 locked in the jail cells." Wilkins winced as Hannah helped him inside to the sofa. "Blackwood's smart. Took out our defenses systematically." Hawk Feather had appeared with bandages and a basin of water. She expertly began treating the sheriff's wound, a gunshot to his side that had gone straight through, missing vital organs but leaving him weak from blood loss. "We need to move," Colt said decisively. "They'll be here soon." "Move where?" Harriet asked, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "We can't go back to town." "And we can't outrun them with an injured man and no wagon," Helena added. Helga stepped forward. "Then we defend this place." "It is our home now. We defend it." The fierce determination in the older woman's voice was echoed in the faces of the other women. Colt looked around the room, seeing not victims but survivors ready to fight for their freedom. "All right," he said. "We make our stand here, but we do it smart." He turned to the 2 deputies. "Cooper, take position upstairs with a clear view of the approach road. Martinez, cover the back door and windows." He surveyed the women. "Do any of you know how to handle firearms?" Hannah and Harriet both raised their hands. "My husband taught me to shoot," Hannah explained. "My father insisted," Harriet added. "He said a woman traveling alone should be able to defend herself." "Good," Colt said, handing Harriet his spare revolver and Hannah the sheriff's weapon. Helga, there are knives in the kitchen. Get anything that could serve as a weapon." "Hawk Feather, once you've finished with the sheriff, I can fight," she interrupted, her hands still working on Wilkins' wound. "My people do not raise helpless daughters," Colt nodded. "We'll create a defensive perimeter. They'll expect us to be concentrated upstairs or in the main room. Instead, we'll disperse throughout the house. They'll have numbers, but we'll have surprise." As the group prepared, Colt took Hannah aside. "If this goes badly," he said quietly, "there's a trapdoor in the pantry floor. It leads to a root cellar with an exit that opens near the creek. Get everyone out that way if you have to." Her eyes locked with his. "We're not leaving you behind, Colt Anderson." "Hannah, no," she said firmly, placing her hand on his chest. "We've all survived this long by staying together." That doesn't change now. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding, a connection that transcended their short acquaintance. Colt covered her hand with his own, feeling her warmth through his shirt. "Just be careful," he said softly. "You too," she replied, and then, surprising them both, she rose on tiptoes and pressed a quick kiss to his cheek. Before he could respond, she moved away to help with the preparations. They worked quickly, extinguishing most of the lamps to leave the house in strategic darkness with just enough light to create misleading shadows. Furniture was positioned to provide cover. The wounded sheriff insisted on taking a position by the front window despite his injury, refusing to be left defenseless. Barely 10 minutes had passed when Deputy Cooper called down from his upstairs post. "Riders approaching, at least 6 moving fast." Colt took position near the front door, Winchester ready. "Everyone in place," he called softly. "Wait for my signal." Outside, horses approached at a gallop, then slowed to a walk. Colt could make out dark figures spreading out around the house surrounding it. A voice called out from the darkness. "Marshal Anderson, this is Silas Blackwood. I believe you have some property of mine in there." Colt remained silent, watching through a crack in the curtains as shapes moved in the darkness. "I'm a reasonable businessman, Marshal," Blackwood continued. "Return my merchandise and you and the others can ride out unharmed. Refuse and well." There was a chuckle. "Let's just say there won't be anyone left to identify the bodies." Still, Colt didn't respond. He could see Blackwood now standing confidently by the gate, his men positioned strategically around him. "Last chance, Marshal," Blackwood called, his voice hardening. "Or we start shooting." Colt looked at Sheriff Wilkins, who nodded grimly. Then he called back, "Come and get them yourself, Blackwood, or are you too much of a coward to face a few women and a couple of lawmen?" There was a moment of silence, then Blackwood's enraged voice. "Burn them out, burn the whole damn place." 2 men rushed forward with torches. Colt's rifle cracked and one went down. Deputy Cooper fired from upstairs, hitting the second, but the remaining men opened fire, bullets splintering wood and shattering windows. The battle erupted in earnest. Colt and the deputies returned fire methodically, making each shot count. Hannah and Harriet proved themselves capable with their revolvers, firing carefully from protected positions when clear targets presented themselves. Blackwood's men tried to rush the house twice, but concentrated fire drove them back. One made it to the back door only to encounter Helena waiting with a cast iron skillet, which she brought down on his head with all her strength. The fighting continued for what seemed like hours, but was likely only minutes. Smoke began to fill the air. One of the outlaws had managed to throw a torch onto the roof. Colt could hear the crackling of flames above them. "The root cellar," he shouted. "Everyone move." They retreated in an orderly fashion toward the kitchen, Colt and Cooper providing covering fire while Martinez helped Sheriff Wilkins. Helena and Helga had already opened the trapdoor, revealing a ladder leading down into darkness. As they descended one by one, Colt remained at the kitchen doorway, firing periodically to keep Blackwood's men at bay. The smoke was thickening, flames beginning to spread across the ceiling. Hannah was the last woman to descend, but she paused at the trapdoor. "Colt, come on," she urged. "Just making sure they don't follow," he replied, firing once more down the hallway where shadows moved. Suddenly, a massive figure filled the doorway, Silas Blackwood himself, a revolver in each hand. "Anderson," he roared, firing wildly. Colt dove for cover behind an overturned table as bullets splintered the wood around him. His Winchester was empty, and he drew his peacemaker as he rolled. Both men fired simultaneously. Colt felt a burning sensation across his upper arm, but Blackwood staggered backward, clutching his chest. The slaver wasn't finished, however. With a guttural cry of rage, he lunged forward, tackling Colt and sending them both crashing into the pantry shelves. The impact knocked the breath from Colt's lungs, and Blackwood's hands found his throat. "Should have minded your own business, lawman," Blackwood snarled, his face contorted with hatred as his fingers tightened. Colt struggled for breath, his vision beginning to darken at the edges. Then suddenly Blackwood's eyes widened in shock. His grip loosened and he slumped forward. Behind him stood Hannah, holding a kitchen knife now buried in Blackwood's back. "He is my business," she said fiercely, helping Colt push the dying slaver aside. Colt gasped for air, staring up at Hannah in a mixture of gratitude and admiration. "Remind me never to make you angry," he managed to say hoarsely. A smile flickered across her face, but the moment was shattered by a tremendous crash as part of the ceiling collapsed in the main room. The fire was spreading rapidly. "Time to go," Colt said, getting to his feet and grabbing Hannah's hand. They descended into the root cellar where the others waited anxiously. The underground passage was narrow and dank, forcing them to move in single file, bent at the waist. Colt took the lead, followed by Hannah, then the other women, with the deputies and Sheriff Wilkins bringing up the rear. They could hear the house burning above them, timbers cracking and collapsing. After about 50 yards, the passage began to slope upward. Colt pushed against a wooden hatch and it swung open to reveal the night sky. They emerged one by one near the creek, sheltered by a stand of cottonwoods. From there, they could see the Jensen house fully engulfed in flames, illuminating several figures running toward horses, apparently deciding to flee rather than continue the fight without their leader. "We need to move," Colt said, supporting Sheriff Wilkins, who had grown pale from blood loss. "There's a line shack about 2 miles east that the stage company uses. We can take shelter there until morning." The journey was arduous, particularly for the wounded sheriff. They took turns helping him along, moving as quickly as his condition allowed. By the time they reached the line shack, a simple one-room structure with a small stove and 2 bunks, dawn was breaking over the eastern hills. They made the sheriff as comfortable as possible on one of the bunks. Hawk Feather examined his wound again, her face grave. "The bleeding has slowed, but he needs a doctor soon," she said. Deputy Cooper volunteered to ride to the next settlement, 20 miles east, to fetch medical help and alert the territorial authorities about what had happened. Deputy Martinez would remain with the group. As Cooper departed, Colt stepped outside to survey their surroundings. The adrenaline of battle was fading, leaving him acutely aware of the wound on his arm and the bruises forming on his throat. More than that, he felt the weight of responsibility for these people who had placed their trust in him. Hannah joined him a moment later, carrying strips of clean cloth torn from her petticoat. "Let me see that arm," she said gently. Colt allowed her to tend to the wound, a deep graze that had torn through his shirt sleeve and left a furrow in his flesh. Her touch was gentle but sure as she cleaned and bandaged it. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for this and for, back there." She met his eyes. "We saved each other." That's what people do when they care about one another. The simple truth of her words resonated within him. Colt had spent years moving from town to town, bringing criminals to justice, but never staying long enough to build connections. Now, looking at Hannah, at her strength, her compassion, her quiet grace in the face of adversity, he found himself wanting something he'd thought was no longer possible for a man like him. "What happens now?" she asked, her hands stilling on his bandaged arm. Colt looked back toward the line shack, where the other women were making the best of their situation, Helga preparing a simple meal from the supplies left for stage passengers, Helena and Harriet organizing their meager possessions, Hawk Feather tending to Sheriff Wilkins. "Blackwood's dead," he said. "His men are scattered. Once word spreads of what happened here, other slavers will think twice before operating in this territory." "That's not what I meant," Hannah said softly. Colt met her gaze. "I know." He took a deep breath. "The Jensen place is gone, but there are other abandoned homesteads in the territory. If you all still want to stay together to build something here." "We do," Hannah confirmed. "But what about you, Colt Anderson? Where will you go when this is over?" He looked out over the Montana landscape, golden in the early morning light. For years, he'd told himself his life was on the trail, bringing justice to lawless places. But standing here with Hannah, he could envision a different kind of life, one with roots, with purpose beyond the badge, with love. "That depends," he said carefully, "on whether there might be room in your new community for a former deputy marshal who's thinking about settling down." Hannah's smile bloomed slowly like a sunrise. "I think we could find a place for you," she said, her fingers entwining with his. "If that's truly what you want." Colt squeezed her hand gently. "For the first time in a very long time, I think it is." 2 days later, they returned to Fort Benton. Deputy Cooper had not only brought a doctor for Sheriff Wilkins, but had also returned with a detachment of Army cavalry who had been searching for Hawk Feather at her father's request. The scattered remnants of Blackwood's gang had been captured trying to cross into Canada. News of the battle at the Jensen farm had spread throughout the territory. When the group rode into town, they were greeted as heroes. The town council convened an emergency session and made an extraordinary offer a tract of land south of town, complete with a large abandoned ranch house that had once belonged to a cattle baron who'd lost his fortune in the financial panic of '73. "It needs work," Mayor Holbrook explained as they stood on the porch of the sprawling structure, "but the bones are good. 15 rooms, a bunkhouse, barn, springhouse, and 200 acres. The town will deed it to you all jointly as a token of our gratitude for ridding the territory of Blackwood and his ilk." The 5 women exchanged looks of amazement. What had been a desperate dream just days before now stood before them as a tangible reality. "There's one condition," the mayor continued. "The town needs a proper school. Miss Lambert, we understand you're a trained teacher." Harriet nodded, stunned. "I am, yes. Would you consider taking on the education of Fort Benton's children? The town would pay a salary, of course." As Harriet accepted enthusiastically, other opportunities emerged. Helga's cooking skills were solicited by the hotel restaurant. Helena's knowledge of crops suitable for the Montana climate interested local farmers. Hawk Feather received a formal request from the Army to serve as a liaison with her people, with the ranch serving as neutral ground for peaceful negotiations. And Hannah, with her business acumen, was offered management of the town's mercantile while the owner recovered from a lengthy illness. The following weeks were filled with activity as the women settled into the ranch house, which they named Liberty Hall. The community rallied around them, providing furniture, supplies, and labor to make repairs. Sheriff Wilkins, recovering steadily from his wound, ensured that the legal paperwork for the property transfer was impeccable. Throughout it all, Colt remained, first helping with the heaviest work of restoration, then gradually assuming the role of ranch manager and unofficial protector of Liberty Hall. His relationship with Hannah deepened day by day, their shared experiences creating a bond that grew naturally into love. One evening in late summer, as the sun set behind the distant mountains, casting the ranch in golden light, Colt found Hannah sitting alone on a bench beneath a large cottonwood tree. The women had planted a garden that was now flourishing, and the scent of ripening vegetables and herbs filled the air. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. She smiled and moved over. "I was hoping you would." Colt sat beside her, suddenly aware of the small box in his pocket and the weight of the question he wanted to ask. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as Hawk, Feather, and Helga gathered the last vegetables of the day, while Helena herded the small flock of chickens they'd acquired into their coop. "It's really happening, isn't it?" Hannah said with wonder in her voice. "Our sanctuary. Our home." "It is," Colt agreed. "You 5 have created something remarkable here. We 6, she corrected him gently. "You're as much a part of this as any of us, Colt." He took her hand. "I'd like to be more," he said quietly. "A permanent part of your life if you'll have me." Hannah turned to him, her eyes bright. "Are you saying what I think you're saying, Colt Anderson?" He withdrew the small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple gold band set with a single pearl. "I'm saying that I love you, Hannah Larson. That meeting you despite the terrible circumstances was the best thing that ever happened to me, that I want to build a life with you here at Liberty Hall for as long as we both shall live." Tears welled in Hannah's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "Yes," she whispered. "Oh, yes." The news of their engagement was celebrated enthusiastically by the other women, who had watched their relationship blossom with approval and affection. Plans were made for an autumn wedding, to be held at Liberty Hall itself, with the entire town invited. As word spread of what had been created at the ranch, a sanctuary for those who needed it, a place of healing and new beginnings, other women began to arrive. First came a young widow with 2 small children, fleeing an abusive brother-in-law. Then two sisters whose wagon train had been attacked, leaving them the sole survivors of their family. Each was welcomed, given shelter and purpose. Some stayed only long enough to regain their strength and make new plans. Others, finding a home among kindred spirits, chose to remain. Liberty Hall became known throughout the territory as a place where women in desperate circumstances could find safety and a chance to rebuild their lives. Colt and Hannah were married on a perfect October day, with Sheriff Wilkins officiating and the other four original women standing as witnesses. The celebration lasted well into the night, with townsfolk and ranchers from miles around coming to offer good wishes and gifts. As the last guests departed, and the women of Liberty Hall retired to their rooms, Colt led his new wife to the small cabin they had built for themselves at the edge of the property, close enough to be part of the community, but offering the privacy a newlywed couple deserved. "Happy, Mrs. Anderson?" he asked as they stood on the porch of their new home, the night sky ablaze with stars. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Hannah replied, wrapping her arms around his waist. "When I was in that tent, chained and afraid, I never imagined I would find not only freedom but love and purpose." Colt held her close, marveling at how his life had changed in just a few short months. "I spent years tracking men like Blackwood, trying to right wrongs without ever stopping to build something good myself. Then I found all of you and realized that justice isn't just about punishing evil. It's about creating something better in its place." Hannah rose on tiptoes to kiss him softly. "That's what we've done here, isn't it? Created something better from something terrible." "We have," Colt agreed, looking back toward Liberty Hall, solid and welcoming in the moonlight. "And we're just getting started." In the years that followed, Liberty Hall flourished. The ranch became self-sustaining with crops, livestock, and various cottage industries operated by its residents. Harriet's school earned a reputation for excellence that drew students from surrounding ranches. Helga's cooking became legendary, with her preserves and baked goods sold as far away as Helena. Helena married a kind-hearted rancher from a neighboring property, but continued to oversee the gardens at Liberty Hall. Hawk Feather divided her time between the ranch and her people, becoming an important voice for peace during a time of increasing tensions. And Harriet eventually found love with a widowed doctor who came to Fort Benton to establish a proper hospital. Colt and Hannah welcomed their first child, a son named Carl, after the Jensen, whose property had been their first sanctuary a year after their wedding. A daughter, Elizabeth, followed 2 years later. The children grew up surrounded by a large extended family of women who had found refuge at Liberty Hall, learning from an early age the values of compassion, courage, and community. By 1886, a decade after Colt had first ridden into Fort Benton tracking rumors of missing women, Liberty Hall had helped over 100 women start new lives. Some had stayed, becoming permanent residents of the expanding community. Others had moved on to opportunities elsewhere, carrying with them the strength they had rediscovered within Liberty Hall's walls. On the 10th anniversary of their rescue, the original 5 women and Colt gathered for a special dinner. They had all aged a decade, but their faces showed the contentment of lives well lived rather than the hardships they had overcome. "A toast," Colt said, raising his glass. "To 5 remarkable women who turned tragedy into triumph, who built not just a sanctuary but a legacy." "And to the man who freed us," Hannah added, her hand finding his under the table, "and then gave us the greatest freedom of all, the freedom to choose our own paths." Hawk Feather, now an elder in her tribe but still a regular presence at Liberty Hall, nodded solemnly. "My people have a saying, 'From the darkest storm comes the rainbow.' We were the storm's survivors, but together we created the rainbow." As the evening continued with stories and laughter, Colt looked around the table at these women who had changed his life and the lives of so many others. From the horror of captivity, they had forged not just freedom, but a community built on compassion and strength, a true sanctuary in the wilderness of the West. And in Hannah's eyes, as bright and determined as they had been that night when she had helped him fight for their lives, he saw the same love that had transformed a wandering lawman into a man with roots, with purpose, with a home. Outside, the lights of Liberty Hall glowed warmly against the Montana night, a beacon of hope in a harsh frontier, a promise kept, a dream realized, a sanctuary built by six hearts that had found in each other the courage to begin again.